Thank you, Farina. The next panelist is Marimas Hosan Mostiller. She's the currently study at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She's going to talk about the second generation identity formation in America.
Assalamualaikum. Hello everyone. Nyandan Marima. My name is Marimas Hosan. That will Mostiller, and that will be the extent of my Champa language skills. My presentation is on the Champa diaspora in the United States, and I thought it was important to talk about, to first start off with the 3 waves of Southeast Asian migration to the United States. A lot of people don't know that prior to the Vietnam War, there were really not a lot of Southeast Asian immigrants in the U.S., and it wasn't until 1975 when, after the fall of Saigon and also the fall of Phnom Penh, the U.S. started the Refugee Act of 1975, and because of that, 4,600 Cambodians and 125,000 Vietnamese immigrants came to the U.S. In 1978, approximately 10,000 Southeast Asians, including Thai, Vietnamese, Hmong, Mien, and Lao immigrated during that time. And one of the larger migrations was in the 1980s after the Khmer Rouge genocide, and that was because of the Refugee Act of 1980. Approximately 50,000 quote Indo-Chinese refugees were permitted to immigrate during this time annually per year up until 1983. So a lot of you guys who are second generation probably came to the U.S. because of that Refugee Act. And as far as population today, according to the 2010 U.S. Census, just U.S. population-wise, there's 308 million people in the United States. 17 million of these people identify as Asian or mixed Asian. So that's only 5% of the U.S. population. So as far as Southeast Asians in the United States, there is even a smaller number. According to the 2010 census, approximately 276,000 Cambodians are in the United States. There are only 26,000 Malaysians in the U.S. and approximately 1.7 million in the United States. And I thought it was important to compare other Southeast Asian groups because Cham is not recognized as an ethnic group in the U.S. Census. However, if you look at the figure on the right side, there is a section where you can fill out language. And on that census, 891 households put in that they spoke the Cham language as their primary household language. And these were in states in California, in Washington, and also in Arizona. And I believe this is an underreported number because the folks who are filling out these forms may be first generation, and they may not put Cham, they may put Vietnamese, they may put Khmer, or they just may plain out misspell Cham. I know from my own experience, my dad spelled Cham with a P at the end, so Champ. So there's a lot of different pronunciations of Cham. So there definitely could be misspellings. And interesting is that the Cham language in the U.S. Census is under Pacific Island languages. And as far as other statistics, just in general, because we're short on time, there are higher poverty rates for Vietnamese Americans and also Cambodian Americans, and lower education rates for Vietnamese and Cambodian Americans as far as attaining a bachelor's degree and also high school diploma. If you're interested in those numbers, you can come talk to me later, and I can give that to you. As far as Cham Muslims in the United States, this is Santa Ana, California. Photos from their website. And they actually started the community there in 1982 with 15 Cham families, and they have grown into 100 plus Cham families there. So I do believe that there are Cham communities that are growing, but unfortunately there are no real statistics on that in the United States. Going into my research, one of the books that I read was by an anthropologist named Philip Taylor. He's an anthropologist from Australia, and he interviewed Cham people in Vietnam along the Mekong Delta, and he found that a lot of participants believe that to be Cham is to be Muslim. So for me, I grew up also in a Muslim household, so I also that study kind of resonated with me, and which is why I wanted to pursue this research on identity. And in my research, I opened it up to all Cham people. However, the folks that actually participated just happened to be Muslim as well. Some of the conditions to participate in my study included, one, they either had to ethnically identify as Cham, two, speak the Cham language, and three, I grew up in a household where the Cham language was primarily spoken. So just had to choose one of those. So I ended up interviewing 8 Cham Americans in California. One person was a 1.5 generation, and that means that she was born outside the U.S. And immigrated to the U.S. at a very young age, and the rest were second generation. So their parents either immigrated to the U.S. as a result of the Vietnam War or the Khmer Rouge genocide. And to start off, it was pretty difficult doing a literature review because there is no theoretical model that fits Cham identity formation. Some of the models that I did look at, the first one is flexible ethnicity, which is coined by sociologist Jessica Vasquez, and she interviewed third-generation Mexican Americans and found that these individuals in different settings identify differently depending on the setting. So in one situation, they may identify as Mexican American, in another situation, they may only identify as Mexican, and in another situation, they may identify as Chicano or just American. So I thought this really resonated with Cham American experience because Cham people may or may not identify as Cham when talking to others. And in other situations, they may identify as only Muslim, or in other situations, they may identify as Asian or Asian American. So instead of flexible ethnicity, I thought flexible identity was more appropriate because it ranged from ethnicity and also with religion. And because there is cognitive dissonance, meaning there are issues with internal issues that Cham Americans may face, I also looked at psychologist Maria P.P. Root's A Bill of Rights for Racially Mixed People. And I'm just going to read a couple of her claims on that Bill of Rights, and it says, I have the right not to justify my existence in this world. I have the right not to justify my ethnic legitimacy. I have the right to identify myself differently in different situations. I have the right to have loyalties and identify with more than one group of people. The third model I looked at was double consciousness, which is from a well-known African-American scholar, W.E.B. Du Bois. And he talks about issues with African Americans being able to have a unified identity, so they often have to separate being Black and also being American. And again, this resonates with Muslim Americans because they may feel inclined to separate their identities in different situations. And one of the last concepts I looked at was dramaturgical performance, which is also from a sociologist named Irving Goffman. And he talks about how in everyday life, individuals play different roles to simulate a theatrical stage performance. So he designates the primary roles, which include the performer, who is the actor, the co-participant, who is deemed the supporting actor, the audience who perceives the performance, and the observer. And in my study, I felt like the participants were the performers, and they were performing for a number of audiences, which is what I'm going to talk about next. And some of the major themes that I found, first was, I mentioned earlier in the study in Vietnam, some people identified, or they stated to be Cham is to be Muslim. In my study, there was a differentiation between being Cham and being Muslim. So people were able to, identify being Muslim and also being Cham. But what was interesting is that they noted how their communities often use Cham and Muslim interchangeably. So for instance, an example is the Islamic school at many communities are often called Cham school, and they're not, there is no Cham language or no Cham tradition being taught, and there's only Arabic and the Quran being taught. So it's an interesting use of Cham and Muslim interchangeably. As far as ethnic identity, the majority of my participants identified as Cham. And there were individuals who also identified as Khmer, either because their parents, one of their parents was ethnically Khmer, or their parents had national ties to Khmer. I only have 1 minute, so I'm gonna rush. Dominant identity, very few people had a dominant identity. For performance, I thought this was really important because there were people who said that they got married the Muslim way, but they may not actively practice Islam, or they may not actually follow Islam anymore. So in this situation, the audience would be the community or the family, because they are feeling like an outsider inside and also outside their communities. And as far as the response to racialization, going back to the performance, most Cham Americans, if you are Cham, you are often asked, what are you? That's like the really big question, and I call it the script. I have one if you guys want to hear it later, but basically individuals will have like their we'll have to talk about their ethnic identity, their nationality, their parents' origins, their language that they speak, all of those backgrounds. And even after you say all those things, the other person will be like, oh, well, what are you? So this is like a regular thing that a lot of Cham Americans have to deal with on quite a regular basis. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but borrowing from Maria P. Roots' Bill of Rights for Racially Mixed People, I thought it was important to create a working Bill of Rights for Cham Americans, and it includes identity, representation, community, and loyalty. I thought that it was important to do that, so if you want to take a look at it later, you can. But to conclude, Cham people must juggle between traditional Muslim values and also fitting in the United States. I think there is an importance to claiming Cham identity in terms of especially getting documented as far as population-wise, and also being able to get federal aid or state aid for individuals who are living in poverty or in working class situations. And I also think it's important, which going back to the Working Bill of Rights for Cham Americans, I think it's important for individuals who are Cham to also be accepting and also patient with other Cham individuals who may not readily identify as Cham, because there are a lot of issues, internal and external issues when identifying as Cham. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marimas. That concludes our first session. I really wish we have extra time so we have a Q&A session. But I think the time is so short, so I guess we will have to meet with individual panelists during lunchtime. So at this point, we will break the first session, and we have 5 minutes break. So I would encourage, we can go up and take the photo up with the panelists right in front of the stage right here. For 5 minutes, and then the second session will start in 5 minutes. So thank you so much for listening.